Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to take a look at the question of who has been president in the MCU. Or maybe I should say, relook at the question, because this is the fourth video I've done on this topic, and I cannot believe the last one was almost a year ago. Man, time flies. But anyway, the main reason I'm doing the video now is because Nando v Movies, which is a great YouTube channel, if you've never seen it, you should check it out, but Nando did a video on presidents, and he actually referenced my version 3.0 video, which was so nice of him to do, and I will leave a link in the description for this video to his video in case you want to check it out. But that reminded me that I need to do a version 4.0 because we got so much information during Brave New World. So, there will be spoilers for Brave New World and pretty much everything before it, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget we have a May contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. So right off the bat, I want to give a huge thanks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe Wiki. I would never attempt to do a video like this without an amazing resource like that. And I also want to thank the Discord folks, Chris, Drew, eScope, and Robbie. You helped not only with this video, but all the previous ones, so thank you so much. It's also worth noting the Netflix shows have now been added to the Disney Plus timeline, meaning they are sacred timeline canon. So any references in those shows we can use throughout the video. But it does raise the question, can we rely on the other pre-Disney Plus shows as sources of information? I mean, they're not in the Disney Plus timeline, which implies they might not be sacred timeline canon, but the way I look at it is they were all produced as though they're canon, so I'm going to count them as very valid sources of information. All right, so we're going to start by going through all of the historical presidents that have made an appearance in the MCU in some form or fashion, starting with George Washington, our first president. He showed up during Secret Invasion. Also, we had Spider-Man climbing the Washington Monument during Homecoming, and, well, the Red Hulk almost destroyed it during Brave New World. And we also saw it in the Winter Soldier as they were jogging around the lake in Washington. All right, so we move to Thomas Jefferson, our third president, and you can see the Jefferson Memorial there, also from the Winter Soldier. Now, we're going to look at an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode where, believe it or not, Coulson was a teacher. It's pretty crazy. But if we zoom in on that stuff on the left, you can see several presidents here, including Adams, our second, Madison, our fourth, and Taft, our 27th. Then in Cloak and Dagger, boy, did they have a ton of presidents. So in this classroom, we go from John Quincy Adams, our sixth president, all the way up to Grover Cleveland, who was both the 22nd and 24th president. All right, so then we move to James Buchanan, the 15th president. You can see him here during Secret Invasion. And of course, Bucky was literally named James Buchanan Barnes in honor of James Buchanan. Then we move to Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. He's seen here on the wall during the Cloak and Dagger episode, although actually you could argue anytime you see money in the MCU, that references Lincoln or Washington or whoever's on the dollar bills, etc. But we also get Lincoln mentioned during Falcon the Winter Soldier. I love this. Walker gives a Lincoln quote, and Bucky's like, "Lincoln? Really?" Walker's like, "Yeah, great man. Great quote." And Bucky's like, "Not when you say it." I love that. And then we can actually see the Lincoln Memorial during Homecoming. So then we move to Ulysses S. Grant, our 18th president. You can see him on the wall there during Secret Invasion. And he was referenced during Ant-Man and the Wasp when Scott said, "I might name the ant Ulysses S. Grant." All right, so then we move to William McKinley, our 25th president, and during the Agent Carter series, they mention President McKinley, Black Tuesday. You think those things just happened? So IRL, McKinley was assassinated in office, but what they're saying in this Agent Carter episode is the villains of the episode, they're the ones that actually killed McKinley in universe. So crazy, right? All right, so then we move to Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president. In The Winter Soldier, he gets a shout out when the car says, "Traffic ahead," and Fury says, "Give me an alternate route," and the car says, "Traffic alert on the Roosevelt Bridge," referring to Teddy Roosevelt. All right, so then we move to Woodrow Wilson, our 28th president, and I want to give a shout out to YouTube user 3122, who pointed out that during The Winter Soldier, when we see this book, Madam President, that's actually a book about Woodrow Wilson's wife, Edith Wilson, filling in for him when he was sick. Wild. All right, so next is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our 32nd president. He's seen here in footage that was viewed during the Winter Soldier movie, but also he gets a huge shout out during the final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when they do a lot of time travel, and they're saying FDR, yes, he's elected president next year, and then a few years later, he forms SSR. So that's really cool. They're tying FDR into the creation of SSR, which of course became S.H.I.E.L.D. And actually, Franklin Delano Roosevelt even shows up himself during these episodes. All right, so now we move on to Harry Truman, the 33rd president. We see his picture here during the Agent Carter series, and in fact, he even gets a shout out when they say, I don't care if you're Vernon Masters or Harry Truman or Tarzan of the Apes. And then he also shows up in a portrait during Secret Invasion. All right, so then we move to Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president. He's seen here in footage that was viewed during the Winter Soldier movie. Next is John F. Kennedy, the 35th president. He gets a shout out during the Civil War movie when Sharon Carter is talking about a picture with Aunt Peggy standing next to JFK. And actually, the Winter Soldier is credited with assassinating JFK in the MCU. That is wild. And then we move to Richard Nixon, the 37th president, who's seen here during Secret Invasion in a portrait on the wall. So I want to take a real quick pause just to point out that of the first 38 presidents, all but 7 have actually had direct call-outs in the MCU. Now, granted, I suspect all 38 are considered presidents in the MCU. I just think it's wild that 31 of the 38 actually got direct references. So, really cool. All right, so now we move on to Jimmy Carter, the 39th president. We see him here during historical footage shown during the Black Widow movie where he's hanging out with Dreykov. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. Also, we see Jimmy Carter showing up in a portrait during Secret Invasion. Now then we move to Ronald Reagan, the 40th president. So this is actually during the Guardians of the Galaxy movie during the flashbacks, and notice on the wall you can see a portrait of Ronald Reagan. Also, we see a portrait of him during Secret Invasion, and then he gets a nice call out during the Winter Soldier movie when they say, shut all runways at BWI, IAD, and Reagan, of course referring to Reagan International Airport. So then we move to George H.W. Bush, the 41st president. So this is some historical footage being viewed by Ultron during the Age of Ultron movie, and you have to freeze at the exact right moment, but if you do, you can catch his picture there. But also his book is seen on the shelf during Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So then we move to Bill Clinton, the 42nd president, and yep, he's another president that's hanging out with Dreykov. Why are all these presidents hanging out with that scumbag? Anyway, this is from the Black Widow movie. So then we move to George W. Bush, the 43rd president. So this is during the Iron Man movie. So you can see him here in an article in the newspaper, the Washington Times. So clearly that's referencing to George W. Bush, the president. Also, we can see Condoleezza Rice, his Secretary of State. Look at that, hanging out with Dreykov. Everybody's hanging out with Dreykov. And I promise I didn't make that weird circle around his head. That's actually in the Black Widow movie. And then we move to Barack Obama, the 44th president. So this is a reference to his famous Hope poster from the 2008 election run. But of course, Tony Stark has made it all about himself and changed it to Iron Man. What a shock, right? And then we also see Obama's press secretary, Jay Carney, showing up during the Avengers movie, which probably means Obama was blamed for the Shatari attack, because, you know, presidents get blamed for every bad thing that happens when they're in office. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We also see a book about Barack Obama on the shelf during the Winter Soldier movie. And we see him in a portrait during the Luke Cage series. And we even get a mention of him during the Empower series that focused on Wakanda, because notice it says Barack Obama became the President of the United States in 2009. All right, so now we move to Matthew Ellis, the 45th president. And he's also the first president created uniquely for the MCU. So, notice, during the Winter Soldier movie, he's attributed with the quote, "Welcome back, Cap," and it says President Matthew Ellis. Now, that's a little confusing at first, because Cap was unfrozen from the ice in 2011 when Obama was president. But I'm going to guess Ellis was somebody important in office. For the minute, I'm going to go with Senator. We'll talk more about why in a second. But now that he's president, they're going to use the highest office held for the quote. So that's why they're saying President Matthew Ellis. All right, so we do see Matthew Ellis throughout the entire Iron Man 3 movie. He's obviously a very important part of it. And it is worth noting, the timeline book officially tells us that this movie happens in December of 2013. There was some confusion whether it was 2012 or 2013, but it's definitely 2013, which means it does not overlap with Obama's presidency, so that's great. And then this is really helpful to know why he probably won. Now, this is actually from a trailer for the movie. It was not actually in the movie. But he says, "You elected me on a single platform. I will defend this country at all cost." So remember when I said Obama probably got blamed for the Shatari invasion, even though obviously that was not his fault? That might be why he lost and why Ellis won. But this does raise the question, did Ellis help with policy prior to being president? Because Killian says, after years dodging the president's ban on immoral biotech research. Well, wait a minute, years? He's only been the president for 1 year because it's 2013, right? But if he was a senator beforehand, he could have put in place the policy as a legislator, which now he's being blamed for as the president. In fact, there's another example of things he did prior to being president, because Killian said, well, 2 years ago, the elephant in the room was this scow. And of course, you'll remember that she spilled 1 million gallons of crude off Pensacola, and thanks to you, not one fat cat saw a day in court. So again, if he was an important senator, he might have been able to prevent the company from having any legal issues with this mess. Of course, Killian then goes on to say, well, I really just needed a reason to kill you that would play well on TV. Because, of course, he does try to kill him, right? And luckily they save him. But had he died, then his vice president, which is the first time that I can remember at least that we even met a vice president in the MCU, but his vice president, who was a crook, would have become president. So, yeah, wild situation. Then, of course, Ellis went on to appear several times. He appeared on WHIH Newsfront videos. He also appeared in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. several times. So the good news is, with Iron Man 3 being in 2013, these two presidencies end up with nice, normal 4-year terms. Obama from 2009 to 2012, Ellis from 2013 to 2016. And by the way, I do know that you stay president into January of the next year, but just for simplicity, I'm going with the full years that they're presidents. All right, so now we move to Donald Trump, the 46th president. So there's actually a lot of evidence that Trump was president. So in the Luke Cage show, they talk about the fact, I haven't felt this weird since November 9th. Of course, they're referring to Trump winning the election. And at one point, they even refer to Luke as Luke Trump because of the way that he's kind of dictating what everybody has to do. Then I love this. In The Runaways, this dude is wearing an I'm with her shirt. Of course, that was Hillary's slogan when she ran against Trump. And he's saying, this shirt no longer fills me with unspeakable sadness. Of course, this is happening in 2017, so it's after Hillary lost. And then in another episode, he's actually saying, I can't die before Hillary is elected. So definitely references to that 2016 election. And then we also get a Trump reference during Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 7 and all the time travel shenanigans, which, by the way, it's a fantastic season if you've never seen it. But Sousa is saying, I think I'm a fan of the 21st century. And Daisy says, yeah, don't get your hopes up. We make a mean prosthetic, but fascism is back. So, by the way, I'm not making these comments, the show is. But yeah, clearly they're referencing Trump here. And then we get this really interesting reference during the Hellstrom show. So Hellstrom takes place during 2020, and notice this newspaper is saying U.S. diplomats arranged a briefing last week with outside experts who warned the president that trade tensions could imperil the economy and hurt his re-election bid. So the bottom line is, whoever is president in 2020, it's their first term because they're able to run for a second term. So then we come to the question, was Biden president in the MCU at all? There's actually no concrete evidence for or against, but I do have some theories, so we'll come back to him in a second. Then we move to James Ritson, the 40-somethingth president. We don't know what number yet because there's some open questions we need to get to. But notice this news ticker. This is from Wakanda Forever, and it says, President Ritson signed trade pact with New Asgard. So the movie happens in 2025, thus meaning we know Ritson was president in that year. And in fact, in that same movie, we see that Val is the CIA director. So obviously Ritson appointed her. And then in Secret Invasion, we get that awful speech where he talks about a bill that designates all off-world born species enemy combatants. And we will kill every last one of you. So yeah, terrible speech. And in fact, Nick Fury lets him know that, tells him that's real one-term president stuff. So that's important. That tells us that this is Ritson's first term, and also that it looks unlikely like he's going to have another term. And we do see in Brave New World that Ross has beaten Ritson to become the new president of the United States. And it's important to note he won in an actual election, right? Because here he's celebrating his win, and in fact he says, they said lose the mustache or lose the election. So the movie is taking place, for the most part, in April of 2027, which means he won an election in 2026. Okay, we got to talk about that in just a second. But first, we got to mention also that Ross ends up stepping down, obviously, and spends probably quite some time sitting on the raft. All right, so now let's go and look at all of the known and the unknown, starting with Trump's presidency and going all the way up to Ross. So the first question is, was Trump blipped? We know he started in 2017, but we don't know whether he's blipped or not. Was Biden even president at all? We don't know. Now let's look at Ritson. We know Ritson lost a 2026 election, but when did he run? In fact, there is something that was a little confusing, I will admit, on the Daily Bugle website. Go check that out if you've never seen it before. Lots of fun stuff out there. But there is an article, which if we zoom in a bit, it says, "Did you make it to the polls this week to vote? Our government is a bit distracted counting the ballots." So this article is being written around the time frame of No Way Home, which takes place in 2024. So it's referring to the 2024 election. So some people have thought, oh, then that means there must have been a presidential election in 2024 because there sure was one IRL. However, notice it doesn't say presidential. So this could have just been a congressional election. So we still don't know for sure when Ritson was elected. And of course, Ross was only president for like 5 months. But the big question with him is, who was his vice president? All right, so this is the known. Now I'm going to move to the unknown with some theories. So I'm going to start with, I think Trump was blipped, and we'll get to why in a second. But that would mean he was blipped in May of 2018. So it's important to note that if the president can no longer serve in office, there is an order of presidential succession. And let's face it, if you're blipped, you're unable to hold office because, you don't exist anymore. But there are 18 people who can take over if the president is not able to serve. But keep in mind, several of these were probably also blipped. And several of them probably aren't really qualified to be president. Because keep in mind, the world is a disaster right now. I mean, look at that New York harbor there of all the ships just sitting there abandoned. But also consider half of the doctors have been blipped. Half the people working on energy have been blipped. Half of the people creating our food have been blipped. So I don't even know that a lot of those people would even want to be president. So I'm going to throw out this idea that keeping in mind that the U.S. Constitution is what establishes when we vote for president and how we vote for president. And keep in mind that there have been 27 amendments to the Constitution. So now that we have this person in the office of president who probably doesn't even want to be there, I'm going to bet that Congress got together and voted on another amendment to the Constitution allowing for a new presidential election. So with that in mind, I'm just going to throw out Biden wins, just because I think it'd be fun for him to win. He doesn't have to win, but let's just say it's him for now. So he serves from 2019 to 2022. So that's when Ritson would then be elected. And remember, we know that it's his first term because of that quote from Nick Fury. So now he would serve as president from 2023 to 2026, and then he lost in the election to Ross, and Ross then became president in 2027. So I don't know whether this is what really happened. I just know at least it works and explains why on earth we have an election in 2026. Also, it is worth noting, when Trump came back from the blip in October of 2023, I'm going to bet he wouldn't be real happy he's not president anymore. But I can also see Congress going, you know what? We're not changing the election cycle again. If you want to run again, run in November of 2026. And obviously, he would have lost if he did win because Ross is the one that won. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on this, but at least this works. So we do still have an open question of who was Ross's vice president. He stepped down in Brave New World, and whoever is the vice president would now be president. Well, one thing we do know is whoever the president is, they were okay with keeping Val in the office as CIA director because that's the office she still holds during Thunderbolts. So when Ross stepped down, whoever became the vice president kept her in as CIA director, and I'm going to bet she's still CIA director even when we get to Avengers Doomsday. But I really want to know, who is that president? They've given us no hints and no clues, so let me know if you have any theories. I truly don't have any guess as to who it might be. But, so, there you go. This is my updated video on all the presidents that have served in the MCU, and I think we have a pretty clear picture of just about everything except who this new president is. So let me know your thoughts. You know I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget, we have that May contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Marvel General section talking about that Nando v Movies video, where he actually mentioned my video. So again, thank you, Nando. You are a class act. And anyone that wants to watch this video, look for a link in the description for this video. And then don't forget, we do have the Doomsday 1-year countdown. Every date listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be watching another movie leading all the way up to May 1st of 2026 when Doomsday comes out. So we have 2,100 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.